Hello and welcome back to another video. In this one we'll be covering the next episode of the front analysis, and this one will be the Luhansk front. But considering that Russia has control over most of Luhansk, I'll also include the Kharkiv region in this analysis, as it'll be somewhat similar of a Russia versus Ukraine but in a small scale. So starting out, we'll be using this front analysis overlay where we see that it is split up. However, we'll also include the supply lines, and that will be it. So first off, if we look at it from the Ukrainian perspective, as we've seen the Ukrainians attempting to advance in this front line for a while now, they have two objectives here. The first one is the small scale objective, where they are going to attempt to break through the Russian defenses and reclaim Svatove, as well as Kreminna. And then the second objective is to reach Starobilsk, as well as cut off and pincer Lysychansk from the north. To pincer from the north Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and attack them from two directions. So the first one, which is the small scale goal, which is Svatove and Kreminna, you'll have to cut off the link between them first, as that is what gives this front line the strength, is that it is connected and it is well supplied. So by cutting off this front line, the Russian forces loses a major supply line to Svatove and severely declines the amount of supplies that it can reach the city. With this, they will have two more objectives. The first one is to pincer both cities. They do that by going to the south from this breakthrough in the center, and to the north by going around and cutting off this highway here. At the same time, they'll have to force their way through the northern area, which is why they are attacking Kazimivka and towards the north. And they will also have to push straight towards Kreminna from the Turske Dibrova area. This will allow them to attack both cities from two directions, and at the same time they'll have to push straight to Svatove, which will attack it from three directions. So for this tactic, they will have to wait until the ground is solid, and if we look at the temperature, it is the same as it was with Kiev and Zaporizhia, a week of a lot of heavy rain, and then we'll start entering the frozen season, which is from mid-December to mid-February. So until at the very least the end of December, it will be difficult for Ukraine to launch a large-scale offensive in the Luhansk region. However, their target will be Svatove and Kreminna. If they manage to succeed in capturing these two cities, they will be able to receive two main hubs of supply towards the next objective, which was Starobilsk and Lysychansk-Severodonetsk area. By attacking and taking Kreminna, they have taken the largest city in the area next to Severodonetsk, and they will have their main route towards the Severodonetsk city. They'll have to go through to the south by the river line, and then northwards to Nova Astrakhan, where they'll have to set up a defensive line here to cut off and have a flank towards Severodonetsk, in which they can bombard it and cut off the supplies by bombarding the supply lines south of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. And at the same time, they can move further north towards Starobilsk, and they'll have to move eastwards from Svatove to connect this area. With this, they'll be able to move southwards and connect to Severodonetsk by attacking from three different directions, straight from the north, from this flank here from the northeast, and straight from the east. With this, they will have operationally encircled Severodonetsk, and they'll be able to attack Lysychansk from the west without having to worry about the south, as they'll be able to outflank it easily from this position. And while they have this whole area, it will be very vulnerable, as it is a very wide front. And this front line is very close to the Russian border, as they have their positions here. Which brings me to the Russian perspective. The Russian perspective is that they need to cut off this supply line, which goes between Kharkiv and the front line. So they have to push southwards from the east of Kharkiv. This is to, on a small scale, cut off the supplies that goes to this front line and limit their ability to conduct any offensive operations. So the way they will have to do that is to push southwards from two directions, which is from the Belgorod area and from this eastern area, after which you'll have to push southwards towards the Vorichne and Kupiansk. This is to cut off the western bank of the Oskil River, and then they will have to do a somewhat reverse Izium offensive to what the Ukrainians did, and push back to their previous positions around Bolgrev Yar, Balaklia, and finally towards Izium, as that was the best position they could have prior to the Ukrainian offensive. With a position that is looking a bit like this, they will be able to cut off the Ukrainian forces and push eastwards. However, this will be a very long and hard operation. In this spring, they spent 2 months to conquer Izium, so we will have to assume something similar to that, especially now that both sides are about equal in strength, similar to what we saw at the start of the war. So with 2 months to just do this, they will have to spend the whole winter season. However, comparing it to the spring, there was a lot of mud, which means that in that season, they were unable to go between the highways and had to go through the highways, which means that they had to focus their forces on the highways. If the Ukrainians mined the highways, they would be severely slowed down. However, now that they can go through the open fields, they'll be able to do this much quicker, and they'll be able to achieve much quicker success than the 2 months. And a different aspect to look at is the concentration of forces. Both sides have an equal concentration of forces if we look at Kharkiv and Belgorod, as both have equal supply lines to these areas, as they are similar cities close to the border and are militarized. So with this in mind, we have to look at what will they prioritize. Russia has prioritized building defensive positions across the border, which means that they are the same as Ukraine, which means that neither side will be planning on doing an offensive operation towards either city, and you'll have to go around, which is here to the southeast. So this means that they will be focusing on a front line where the Ukrainians and the Russians are both focusing on the east, and will be meeting each other as they continue fighting parallel to each other. This means that the front line will most likely be formed further east than it was previously, and they will fail to attack Izium unless they are able to completely overpower the Ukrainian armed forces. So essentially, the Russian way to win this front line is to avoid fighting in it, as they will just have to hold their defensive line as they push from the west and try to cut off their forces from their supplies. And looking at this at the scale of the Donbas region, we see that there are two significant points. As we've earlier mentioned in a video a long time ago, the Russians need to cut off the Donbas supplies by attacking Pokrovsk as well as Bervinkov. However, now that they've lost Izium, they need to go further east, and that will be Slavyansk. With the fall of Bakhmut, they will be able to push towards Slavyansk and cut off the supplies from the north, which means that they still have to focus on Pokrovsk. However, now that the Ukrainians are able to have Izium and this whole defensive line to the north, they'll also be able to just move their trucks to these cities to the northwest of the Donbas region and continue their supply in this circle of train railways. Which means that the Donbas region is still well supplied even if the Russians manage to take Pokrovsk and Slavyansk. In this scenario, we see that it is very significant for the Russians to attack this northern area and retake Izium, as that will allow them to attack Bervinkov and again cut off the supplies from the Donbas region. Which means that it is most likely a priority for the Donbas region that the Russians manage to retake Izium. The final aspect to look at is terrain. By looking at the terrain, we see that it is mostly flat. There are some small hilly areas, but other than that, there's the Oskil River and there are some forests. However, this will be in the winter, which means that the forests will have no leaves, which means that they provide little to no cover. And at the same time, this river will be either frozen or it will be severely diminished due to the hot summer we've just had, on top of little to no rain. However, with the rainy week that is just coming, it will most likely be filled. So in this southern area, it will be a significant hindrance to whoever wants to cross it. Other than that, it is mostly flat, as we can see here in the west. There's a bit of the hilly areas here in the center. So the terrain does not play any significant role other than the fact that it is clear area to walk through. There's no hindrances, and most importantly, easy targets for artillery, which gives the advantage to whoever is defending. This means that we will most likely see a concentration of forces here to the north of the Izium region, the Kharkiv region, and engage in a offensive here. The reason I say this is because yesterday Putin announced that of the 300,000 mobilized soldiers, 150,000 have entered the special military operation in the south, which means that they have entered this front line, and then another 150,000 are in reserve. Being in reserve can both mean that they are in reserve. It could also mean that they're planning on using them elsewhere, and that elsewhere could be the Kharkiv region. If they plan on attacking the Kharkiv region from both the north and the south, 150,000 soldiers is exactly what they need, as they'll be able to cut off this main supply route from the north around Sumy, and they'll be able to focus their forces around the Izium front. If they manage to take Izium, they'll be able to focus westwards as well as southwards towards the Donbass region. By taking the Donbass region as well, they'll be able to focus further, and that will be the next episode on the frontline analysis. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.